There is so much conflicting information right now about fasting, intermittent fasting, the various types. And in particular, as it relates to women, I think the research is a bit confusing. Oftentimes, especially for midlife women, women in their 40s, 50s, and above, we've been left out of the research. And so this has made for quite a bit of confusion. Do you lose muscle when you fast? Is it safe to do so? At what age should you not do it? So many questions. And then there's something called fasting mimicking, which I don't fully understand. And maybe some of you have heard of it. Maybe you're like me, you don't fully understand it either. We're going to dive into that today and see if it's something that could be beneficial for you. So today I have with me Renee Fitton. She is a registered dietitian and specifically a longevity dietitian, which I love. She is the director of education at Prolon, which has a fasting mimicking diet, which I just discussed. Renee specializes in applying advanced nutritional research to help people achieve longer, healthier lives, especially through approaches that will benefit our cellular health without requiring drastic lifestyle changes. Renee, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to cover this topic. It is one that is near and dear to my heart and that I think your audience is going to be really intrigued by and hopefully also get a chance to sink their teeth in it, quite literally, and see some of the incredible longevity, health, wellness, metabolism benefits.
The longevity, you're the first person I've heard being a longevity dietitian. So what would you say is the difference between, okay, somebody seeks out a registered dietitian through their insurance, or maybe they have a chronic disease versus a longevity dietitian?
It is such a great question. So I actually got my master's degree, which now is required for registered dietitians who are entering into the field. You must have a master's degree. It wasn't always the case. So there are still some dietitians that don't have master's degrees, but new dietitians must. I got my master's degree in longevity nutrition. And so everything that I learned was not just how to leverage nutrition for general health, but how to leverage nutrition to live healthier longer. And so we are really starting to hear this concept of health span, meaning not just living as long as humanly possible, but making sure the years that we live are healthful. And so that way, when we, reach 100, 110, we are doing so with the same health and excitement and freedom that we are currently living in our feces even, right? So that is what I spent a lot of time learning and still to this day focus my energy and research on. And as part of all of that, I also am very grateful to work at El Nutra, which is a longevity nutrition company whose mission is to leverage nutrition to support health span. And that company was actually founded by somebody by the name of Dr. Walter Longo, which for some people might actually ring some bells because he is today known as the most important longevity researcher today. He's also who founded the master's program at USC that I graduated from in health span and longevity. So you can see that there's a lot of pieces of my life that kind of stem back to or come back to this concept of longevity and living healthier longer.
I love it because when you think about registered dietitian, I know I often think about somebody seeks them out when something has occurred, like they have kidney disease, heart disease, diabetes, maybe they're overweight and they don't know how to lose weight. So there's already been these things that have occurred, whereas the longevity, I feel like puts a little bit more emphasis on let's prevent some of these things from happening in the first place.
Absolutely. And that is a huge part of my mission, certainly, is to try and convince people to think about this a little bit earlier. But that being said, just because you are being reactive, and it is unfortunately in the world today, with 97% of Americans being metabolically unhealthy, it is still so important for me to share that it is never too late to make a change. And we can absolutely reverse the clock on a lot of the poor decisions we've made. Now, is it easier for your body to start sooner? Absolutely. So the earlier you start, the better, but it's also never too late. So it's this perfect balance between those two sentiments.
Because when you think about metabolic health, it's interesting because for the longest time, I thought about metabolism as kind of this, I don't even know how to describe it, sort of this concept like it's fast or it's slow. Okay, if you're one of the lucky ones genetically, you have a fast metabolism. I heard it my whole life, but it's so much more complex than that. So when we talk about being metabolically unhealthy, what exactly is that?
Okay, that is a great question. And I think the first thing that I want to highlight is that metabolism and metabolic health are actually, in my opinion, kind of two slightly different things. Metabolism, as you originally pictured it, it is still accurate. Your metabolism is the ability for your body to take energy and use it. And if you are really efficient at taking energy and using it, that's what we oftentimes term fast metabolized. That is generally also recognized as a more healthy metabolic rate and metabolism. And it means that you can take a lot of this energy and actually put it to good use instead of storing it as fat or storing it as unused energy. And so that original concept isn't necessarily wrong, but when we look at metabolic health, we're looking at a lot more things on top of that. So we're looking at even things like weight and weight management. We're looking at muscle tone. We're looking at even like honestly even immune health, really, because everything ties back together. All of those things impacts that metabolic rate, or that speed at which and the efficiency at which you take energy and use it. It all kind of interplays together. So there's a lot of things that come into place when we talk about metabolic health. And right now, I think one of the biggest things that people are talking about when they think about metabolic health is insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, the way that we use sugar. And are we using it well, or are we letting it wreak havoc in our bodies? And we could spend a whole episode talking about insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity, but I would say that that's right now one of the biggest topics in metabolic health today. That's because of the diabetes and prediabetes epidemic that we're seeing in the world today.
Yeah, so important to address this because you're right, it's worldwide. It's not just in our country or in the Western countries, but it is worldwide and so important to address. Now, going back to the topic of fasting, which I alluded to at the beginning, we have fasting, which I think of just straight fasting is like, it might be 24 hours, it might be longer. Then I think of intermittent fasting, like, okay, you have a window, which most women, that's what they're doing when they fast. They have a window of, say, 14, 16, 18 hours. What is fasting mimicking?
So that is a really great question. Fasting mimicking is not necessarily a difference in time, although it can be. It is more so a difference in how we fast. So are you going water only, which is generally how we think of fasting, right? If you're either eating or you're not. But fasting mimicking kind of turns that on its head, is the ability to get all of the incredible benefits of water only fasting, but while still eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks throughout the day. So fasting mimicking is really, really great, not only because it's of course easier to do because you can eat, but it's also safer. And we've seen some really great research on muscle protection, not to mention at this point now, over 40 clinical trials showing the effectiveness of it, like what we see with water only fasting. And even in some cases, better than, because of the safety, because of the reduction in stress to your body that water fasting can certainly induce. So there's really just wonderful opportunity with fasting mimicking as a solution if you're thinking about fasting, but you're just not sure even where to begin. I think this is an amazing place to start. Even if you're already into water fasting, I would say that this would be an area to explore because of the added benefits that fasting mimicking can offer. And we can kind of touch on that a little bit more. But I do also want to touch on the question around timing, right? And the amount of time that we fast, because this is really where I think fasting mimicking shines. Because I think that most people can kind of get around the concept of fasting for about 12 hours or fasting for even 14, 16, 18 hours. And that's great because sure that there are benefits to what we call time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, which is fasting under anything about 2 days. But there are added benefits if you can reach fasting windows of over 2 days. So 3, 4, 5 days. Now, when I tell you that, a lot of people are starting to say, okay, Renee, I'm not going to do that. Like I can wrap my hand around this 16, 18 hours, but you hit 72 and I'm going to probably say no, thank you. But now, when we present the concept of being able to do that with food, it's suddenly far more digestible, right? And not to mention safer, because when we go longer fasting, we have to certainly worry about safety. And when we go longer fasting, we start worrying about muscle loss. And we all know, I think now in today, the nutrition and health education of the world today, we know the importance of muscle for our health. And so, whatever we do, we need to make sure that our interventions are protecting our muscle. And time and time and time again, with fasting mimicking, we see the ability for there to be, sure, great weight loss, but that weight loss is paired with muscle protection. So, this is just kind of the surface level benefits of fasting and fasting mimicking, but that's where we'll start for now.
Yes, I think that's been the biggest debate right now is the muscle loss, especially in midlife, which, we start losing muscle in our 30s, but then when we reach our 50s, it really starts to go off a cliff if we don't do something about it. And I myself, I'm 63, so I'm in my 60s, and I generally fast around, at this point, 12 to 14 hours. When I go longer, I run into some difficulties. So, how is a woman able to eat their breakfast, lunch, snacks, and still be fasting?
So it is actually quite complicated. It's not just about like keeping it in low calories. There's a really careful science to how we get those benefits with food. And it requires very specific foods in very specific amounts because what we're trying to achieve and what let me actually maybe back up a little bit and talk about how the scientists who uncovered fasting mimicking went about doing this. What they were looking to figure out was what does our body actually perceive as a fast? Sure, we as humans, when we read the dictionary, we see that it is either you eat or you don't. And when you don't eat, you're fasting. But what scientists uncovered is that our cells don't read that same dictionary. They actually have a slightly different definition of what a fast is. And it turns out that there are certain nutrients in certain amounts that really trigger us out of a fasted state and tell our body that it's time to grow. And that's primarily going to be things like protein and simple carbohydrates. Those tell our body, grow, 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 grow. But if we focus on things that are a little bit higher in fat and we make sure that we keep proteins and simple sugars in really low amounts and we're really careful about the specific micronutrients that we give, we live below some of these alarm bells on the cell surface, we can actually kind of live under the alarms, live under, I like to think of it like laser beams 007 style, and just making sure you're crawling underneath all of them very carefully. And that's what we're doing with fasting mimicking. So it's not super simple, and that's why I'm a big proponent for using pre-made fasting mimicking kits that do all of the thinking for you, but is based off of, at this point now, nearly 30 years of science and research on exactly that, uncovering how we fast with food.
Interesting. So, is a woman able to get enough protein using this system to sustain her muscle?
Great question. So, a very important feature of fasting mimicking is that you should not be doing it all of the time. It's not an everyday thing. It's only designed to be done primarily to do what I like to consider like a spring cleaning. So, you should only be doing this periodically, maybe about 4 times a year. The rest of the days, So, what I've just suggested is a total of 20 days, right? Because a fasting mimicking diet is generally about 5 days. You do that 4 times a year. That's only 20 days of the year. The rest of the days of the year, you should be focusing on getting enough protein, making sure that you're doing strength and muscle bearing activity, and making sure that you're supporting on building. But during the fasting mimicking orders, these prolonged fasts that you're doing periodically, what we're focusing on is cleanup and repair. We're giving that quick little moment there. During the fasting mimicking diet, because it's only for 5 days, we see muscle protection. Some people have even seen muscle building during this time, but that's certainly not going to happen for everybody. For most people, we see the protection. If you were to do this very, very frequently, to be honest, I'm not sure if you would see those same results, right? Because you do still need to make sure that you're consuming on the rest of the days an adequate amount of protein. And during the fasting mimicking diet, it is low. Now, let me just quickly mention the science behind the muscle protection. Because certainly when I say that the fasting mimicking diet is a low protein, people get a little bit worried and they start thinking, well, even if you're telling me that it's muscle protective, I'm not sure if I believe you. And I want to make sure that you guys give this a shot. Do your body composition before and after, and you'll see I'm right. So I'm not worried about that. But even just to get you over that fear, let me explain how the science works in the muscle protection. So when we go into a fasted state, our body actually responds by increasing growth hormone. And that's a natural response to a fast because it's your body's alarm bells going off and saying, oh my goodness, we don't have a lot of food right now. We got to protect our most important organ, which is our muscle. That's one of our most important organs. So growth hormone actually goes up when we're in a fasted state. Now, when we're in a fasting mimicking diet, not only does growth hormone go up, but we also are providing some nutrition and even a little tiny bit of protein, because in the fasting mimicking diet, while we make sure that we're super particular, we give a little bit, just not too much that it triggers those alarm bells. And so you still get a teensy bit of protein, you still get a little bit of carbohydrates, you still get some nutrients. And so all of that is really able to make sure that we are not tapping into muscle and we're not going to muscle for energy. We're going to the nutrition that we're giving our body for energy. And then as a final little kind of checkbox, in the pre-made kits currently being made by two major companies, L NutraHealth and Prolon, they also add something called the L drink, which is a glycerol-based beverage. And what that does is it allows your body to make sugar from that if it needs it. And only if it needs it. And that's the really cool thing about that, is that our body's smart enough to know, am I going to waste time and energy working on turning that to sugar or not? And if it needs it, it will. And if it doesn't, it won't. And so some really cool science on making sure that muscle is protected during this. And that makes so much sense when we think about why this fasting mimicking was even created in the first place, which was for patients with cancer, where we are the most careful in those patients about protecting muscle.
I like that you talked about the fact that it's not all the time, because what I see a lot in the nutrition space is someone comes out and they're like, do this all the time, like it's keto or it's intermittent fasting or it's low carb. And I don't like that all or nothing approach. And I see right now fasting taking a little bit of a hit with women worried about muscle. So now you have people saying, never do it if you're in perimenopause. You have people saying, no, this is what you should do, when in reality, somewhere in between makes far more sense.
Absolutely. And also, let me be super transparent. There's also some people that should never do this, or who really shouldn't do it at some period during their lives. And some of those areas are going to be anybody that is currently pregnant or breastfeeding. This is not a good time, because those are pro-growth phases. And so that's not a good time to be doing fasting and fasting mimicking. Fasting mimicking has a lot of nuts. So anybody who has an allergy to nuts, it's not going to be a really good fit, at least not right now, where the availability and the programs are quite heavily nut-based. Individuals with a history of eating disorders, this isn't going to be a really good fit. Although, let me mention that for those that don't have a history of eating disorders, fasting mimicking has been able to show a really cool ability to change our relationship with food for the positive, to build a stronger relationship with food, to motivate other lifestyle and behavior changes. So it's kind of like this trigger to set you off on the right foot. And why I love for anybody who's really starting to get started on making lifestyle changes, doing 5 days of the fasting mimicking diet is a really good kickstart. I can share a study if you're interested on how individuals with type 2 diabetes actually completely made some lifestyle changes completely unrelated to nutrition because of fasting mimicking, but there's some really cool results there too. But yeah, there are some people that shouldn't do this, and it's important to talk about that too.
Now, what about people that are older? So, as I mentioned, I'm in my 60s or early to mid 60s. When is it too late for somebody to do this? Is there a point where you say, you know what, it's probably not a good idea because we're worried about being frail, not getting enough to eat? And I know a lot of people, when they reach a certain age, they'll sometimes undereat. I saw this with my mother in law. I should get up and have tea and a piece of toast, and that would be it until dinner. That's not enough. So when is that cut off?
Great question. So generally we recognize that even about at the age of 60, that's when protein needs really do ramp up. So that's important. But that doesn't necessarily preclude you from doing a fasting mimicking diet because, as I mentioned, this is really only meant to be done periodically. Now, if you are in a state where you are sarcopenic, meaning that you're muscle wasting, then focus at that time on building muscle. That should be your focus. It shouldn't be on fasting mimicking, even though there are really incredible longevity benefits separate from weight loss benefits with fasting and fasting mimicking. If your body is in a sarcopenic state, then you do not want to move forward. But we, with the L Nutra Health programs, for example, as long as you are generally healthy, the cutoff is the age of 90. So
Wow,
that's a pretty high number.
that
It's
is.
just really about making sure that you do have a reasonable amount of muscle reserves, that you're generally healthy. And if you have any concerns, talk to your doctor and just get the sign of approval to move forward. There's even on the Prolon website a provider finder so that you can find practitioners that work with fasting mimickings in and around your area. There's a lot of telehealth practitioners now that are doing this. So, if you're not sure, ask and get that information and that support.
No, very good advice. And I'm assuming too, there's personal circumstances. So I'll use myself here. In the last, 10 months, I had two major surgeries. One was a back fusion, and the second was a combination of two procedures, a bicep tendon repair, it was disattached, and a rotator cuff repair. So I backed off completely and totally from even a 12-hour fast during recovery for both of these because I'm like, you know what? I need protein to repair right now. And I do not need to lose any more muscle than I'm going to through this whole process. So I think there's those individual circumstances. It doesn't mean that it's not right for that individual at all. It just means maybe not right now.
Absolutely. And I love that example because when we look at surgery and when to fast before you go into surgery can actually set you up for some great results because we see that fasting mimicking actually has some really good support for recovery, for setting your body up because we get a deep cellular cleanup when we fast for over 3 days. Something called autophagy kicks in, can do a lot to really help set your body up for a healthy immune system. There's even some early research on stem cell activation, but we try not to go there right now because it's still too early, but some really cool results even for pre-surgery, right? Post surgery is a different time. As you mentioned, this is where we need to focus on repair. Probably will have to focus on higher protein intakes, and that wouldn't be a good time. Once you've given enough time for repair, that would be a great time to then return to doing that cleanup. But you want to make sure that you are fully recovered before diving back in.
Mhm. Yes, important, very important. I think sometimes women, especially, they're so afraid of gaining weight coming off of a surgery. I've seen this with my clients that they're barely eating anything, and it's like, no, this is not the time to be dieting or thinking about that. It's the time to be really looking at repairing your body. Now, what about goals? So I teach an intermittent fasting program. I haven't taught it in some time, but I never teach it like a weight loss program per se. Now, can you lose weight? Yes, I see it all the time, but it's not really the focus. The focus is on the cellular health, the benefits. With fasting mimicking, what do you see? Do you see women coming in saying, I have got to lose weight? Or do you see women like me who don't need to lose weight? What do you see?
Great question. So we see across the map, and there's going to be, I mean, I'll touch on some of the major groups that are coming in to leverage fasting mimicking. And I also want to touch on some of the groups where there's research that's really starting to burgeon and can be some really cool opportunities down the line. But right now, of course, weight loss is going to bring in a lot of people. I think it's on people's minds. But what we love about the weight loss, and I'll remind the audience one more time here, is that it's the right kind of weight loss. It is a weight loss with muscle protection. It is visceral fat loss. The most dangerous fat is hepatic fat loss, which right now is another big problem where hepatic fat is also liver fat. So these are all the fats that we're tapping into here, and it's the right kind of fat loss. The next area that we see a lot of people is going to be longevity and biological age. So a study was just published last year with fasting mimicking, just doing it 3 times. Okay. That's 5 days a month for 3 months, showed a change in biological age by 2.5-year improvement. 2.5 years biological age with 15 days of intervention is truly unheard of in the longevity world. So this is super, super impactful. So anybody who's looking to get your biological age, which is the age that your cells actually behave, and really far more important than the age on your birth certificate, this is maybe one of the most impactful things that you can do to support a healthy biological age. So that's another one. And that's even going to be, regardless of whether or not you need to lose weight, that is going to be valuable for you. In that same study, they even looked at how, if you were to do that 3 times a year for 20 years, how that would impact some of these prevention metrics for some of the major chronic disease that afflict us today. Things like cerebrovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, all these chronic diseases. And we saw that there was a risk reduction, even in healthy people. Okay. So these are people that have no risk right now, anywhere between 5 to 25%. That's risk reduction. So even if you're already healthy, this is a great time. I certainly like to consider myself a healthy person. I've done the fasting mimicking diet 15 times. Okay. And I always give myself at least 3 months in between cycles. I do it very healthfully, but I'm doing it for that prevention, right? Another area, some just like kind of fun ones that I like to mention. We have a really cool study on dermatology and skin health, reduction in fine lines, improvement in skin hydration, improvement in skin texture. And this was all in a group of women between just over the age of 30. Really incredible results there. We see really great results, of course, in metabolic health. In fact, the L Nutra Health program that I was alluding to earlier is a physician and dietitian supervised version of a fasting mimicking diet. A full programmatic approach gives you all of this additional support and resources because those programs are designed to put diabetes, prediabetes, and all these metabolic conditions into remission. It was originally thought that you wouldn't even be able to put these diseases into remission. And now with solutions like fasting mimicking, it's finally kind of putting on these light bulbs on people, on even physicians' minds that, okay, wow, this is really now possible. We're seeing that patients are coming off of their medication. We're seeing that patients are dropping their HbA1c, which is that metric of how you're managing your blood sugar, reducing the need for GLP-1s that are just wreaking havoc on people. So we're really working at that root cause with people that may already be further down the line in working against their metabolic health, but there's absolutely an answer there. And those programs, by the way, just to be clear, are anywhere between 4 and 12 months where patients are fully coming off of medications and putting their disease into remission. So this doesn't take a very long time either. So really, really impactful. And so that even will apply, for people who, maybe have prediabetes or just are looking to support general metabolic health. And maybe you haven't, you don't have a diagnosis, but that there's still a lot of opportunity in supporting that insulin sensitivity and blood pressure and cholesterol and pretty much anything that your doctor's checking when you go in. If you start seeing those numbers creeping up, there's opportunity there to kind of try and reverse the clock. And I really do believe that the research is so strong there that that should be a really big area where people are starting to think, oh, this could be a good time for me to look towards fasting mimicking. If they haven't already done it just for prevention and optimization. So those are going to be my big ones.
I think the blood sugar regulation, insulin sensitivity, far more important than women realize when they're going through perimenopause and menopause. And I know I thought this too. I thought everything was about the decline in estrogen. Now, with the knowledge I have now, I can see, oh, we start to really have a problem with blood sugar regulation. Oh, we can become insulin resistant. And I've seen it even in women that they're not overweight. They don't have a lot of body fat, but they're still dealing with this as they go through that window of perimenopause and menopause. So how can this really support women in that juncture of their life?
So important, because it is, in fact, it is kind of this connection actually of that drop in estrogen in also causing all of these downstream effects like insulin resistance that starts to increase. And it's because estrogen is so important for so many other things beyond just sexual health. It is such a major hormone for us as women. So when that declines, all sorts of other things kind of start being impacted, including insulin sensitivity. In the studies that were done, certainly in type 2 diabetes, but just generally, even metabolic health overall, we see women over the age of 45, over the age of 50, seeing those same beneficial impacts that we see just for the other groups that are going through these programs. So it is absolutely still supportive in supporting that insulin sensitivity. It is also, again, when we see that drop in estrogen, it makes it much harder to protect our muscle. This is why we see after the age of 50 that there is a significant jump in that loss of muscle. So again, that's where fasting mimicking, where we see that muscle protection, becomes a really great solution. Even biological age. So that piece of the puzzle is also supporting as we age, right? And kind of pushing that number back. And then, we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about autophagy and this deep cellular cleanup. But what happens as we age is that our body continues to build and build and grow and, make more intracellular organelles and components that help our cells work. But those eventually kind of putter out or don't work so well and need to be removed. And one of the most important ways that we do that cleanup is through this process called autophagy, which literally means self-eating. And it is the ability of our body to go in and go find the stuff that doesn't work as well, eat it and get it out. And autophagy is really hard to trigger, unfortunately. And one of the only ways that we know that we can really trigger this autophagy is through fasting for at least over 48 hours. And so you can imagine that a lot of people really aren't taking advantage of this. I like to consider it spring cleaning. And so we really need to make sure that we're giving our body the opportunity to turn on autophagy periodically and do that spring cleaning, get rid of the junk, allowing your cells to work better. And when you do that, everything starts working more harmoniously because our cells are the very beginning of everything. Our cells run our whole body. We have it truly is absolutely everything. And that's also why, when, I mentioned that skin health study, our skin is an external reflection of our cellular health, right? And so I love that study actually, because I think that it just goes to show what's happening deep inside of our cells when we go through these programs. It really is fully systemic. Our whole body is really able to benefit from this. But one of the biggest benefits is going to be that deep cellular cleanup that is so hard to turn on.
My mind just went down a rabbit hole as you were talking, so bear with me. I was thinking about, it was a recent interview I did with Dr. Patel, who specializes in the study of glutathione and antioxidants and oxidative stress on the body. So, and you may or may not be able to answer this straightforward, but how does it affect the antioxidants? Because he explained, like with glutathione, it's not necessarily that we have less as we age, is that we need more and more because of that oxidative stress.
Absolutely. So I think where this kind of starts tying in a little bit is that our body experiences oxidative stress every single day. Just breathing causes oxidative damage, right? And that oxidative damage will impact again at the cellular level. And that is what's causing things to not work as well. That is what is causing that damage. And that is why autophagy is so critically important, because we need to clean things up and then we need to replace them. And that's actually maybe something that is even more important, and why we don't recommend long-term fasts all of the time, because we want to make sure that we are also rebuilding. You don't go in and do your spring cleaning and realize, oh, I hate all of my dining room chairs. We need to they're all broken and they have stains all over them. Throw them out and then not replace them. You'd have nowhere to sit for dinner anymore. You have to go and find new ones and replace them. And now you have a beautiful new dining set. And so that is part of the magic, is what we call the refeeding phase, where we rebuild and regrow. And now, sure, I mean, as I mentioned, oxidative damage is going to just continue to happen. Yes. But now you have the strongest, best new cells that can kind of take a few more punches before you do your next cleanup and then refuel again. Right. So you really just need to kind of do that spring cleaning and set yourself up so that you can fight back against all of the inevitable punches that you're going to take.
So possibly strengthening the immune system when done properly overall.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of even a whole separate
Yeah.
world that we can kind of uncover, but there's some interesting research that's starting to come out on autoimmune conditions and fasting mimicking. We see very early, right? So this is preclinical. This is primarily in mice models. There are some human studies that are starting to come out, but a lot of it is preclinical. So I always like to give my little warning. Make sure to go look at the research before you do anything and talk to a healthcare practitioner. But there's some really cool research in multiple sclerosis and IBD, and we're seeing regeneration there, which is fighting back against a defective immune system, which is what's happening in autoimmunity. Your own immune system has gotten kind of its wires crossed and is fighting against your own body instead of fighting against what it usually should be fighting against, which is outside components. That's really interesting in the world of immunity. And even in generally healthy individuals, we see an improvement in the ratio of various immune cells. And we showed that in that biological age study that I referenced, which I think is so exciting when we think about immune health and how fasting mimicking specifically can support there.
Yes, the biological age. We are looking to get younger biologically, even though the birthday candles are increasing on the cake every year. Now, when we look at intermittent fasting, we've talked about the midlife. We've spoken about the type 2 diabetes, the immune system, and the skin. What are other benefits? Like, for instance, I'm thinking of brain health. I'm thinking of, well, my sister just recently passed from Alzheimer's. So this is near and dear to my heart. And any edge that I can get from my brain, it's really important, I think, to be looking at this.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought this up because it's also a topic that's very near and dear to my heart as well. And honestly, one of my big whys as to why I do this, because Alzheimer's and cognitive and degenerative diseases run in my family as well. So it's a big problem. And it's one of the leading the causes of aging as well, or one of the biggest concerns when we age as well. So what we've been able to see early research with Alzheimer's is really positive with fasting mimicking. This is again preclinical, but we even see in these models that there is removal of the beta amyloid plaque. This is the problem, what is building up in the brain that is causing the disease. So that's really exciting for early research. And in that study, they also did do a small pilot with individuals with Alzheimer's to make sure that it was safe. So there's definitely going to be more research exploring that space, I think, coming down the line. Now, in terms of what we're doing more preventatively, we see that again in that I had mentioned in the biological age study, we looked at some of those prevention metrics, and there was, even in healthy individuals, but certainly in those that were already exhibiting some risk factors out of range, improvement in the risk of developing those conditions in individuals that were doing this 3 times a year over the period of 20 years in that more perspective analysis. And then the last thing that I want to mention just about brain health is in healthy individuals. So what do we see in terms of energy? What do we see in terms of clarity? What do we see in some of these things that we can notice right away? And because when we fast and do fasting mimicking, we do see an increase in use and creation of ketone, is it loves to use those ketones that are created, and it's kind of like high octane fuel for our brain. It really kind of runs really efficiently on that. It's also really nice for your body to get a little bit of a switch of fuel sources. So letting your body go into ketosis for a little bit can really give you a lot of that mental clarity. And we see that with real life testimonies of people who have done fasting mimicking, saying that they feel more alert, that they feel more mental clarity. We call it actually something called keto euphoria, when you get to some of these, like day 4 or day 5 of your fast, and certainly on day 6 when you're kind of really coming off of this, really what it feels like a high, is I notice that I smell things better, I hear things better, I see things brighter. So it's really, really cool what happens when we let our body kind of get that shift. And yeah, I was also thinking that it might be worth mentioning some of the metabolic benefits to brain health, because when we look at Alzheimer's, for example, you might even hear some people calling it type 3 diabetes.
Yes.
And that's because it is so closely tied with poorly regulated blood sugar levels and insulin resistance and all these things that we were talking about a little bit earlier around metabolic health and healthy blood sugar levels. So again, finding ways that you can support that through nutrition earlier on is going to be certainly supportive to a healthier brain health down the line as well. So very long answer to what seems like a quick question, but I think when we work with fasting mimicking and when we work at root causes, so many things can be impacted, which is why it's so beneficial.
Absolutely. So important. I think a lot of women, and I did this too, especially around the juncture where I was turning 50, were focused completely on the aesthetics. Like, oh, why is my body changing? Oh, why do I suddenly have more belly fat? It's easier to gain weight and harder to take it off. And we're so focused on that. We're not thinking about these other things. We're not looking at the big picture, with brain health being a huge part of that. So I love the holistic view that we're taking of this all the way around. Now, when we look at women, that kind of looping back to the estrogen, because estrogen, of course, links into the brain health. We lose estrogen, we can often begin to have that brain fog. I know I certainly had it, where I would walk into our pool room off of the family room and be like, what am I here for? What's going on in that brain fog? But oftentimes what I see is women think, okay, I'm going to get an estrogen patch and that's going to take care of everything. And that's going to put me back to where I was. I say, and I do estrogen, bioidentical hormones. I've done them for years. I am a believer, but I don't think it's a Band-Aid fix. And I don't think it takes care of everything. It's a small part of a big picture.
I couldn't agree more. I certainly think that it is a it's part of the equation. And I like to remind people that even when we're in our 30s, even in our 20s really, but certainly in our 30s, before even perimenopause begins, and certainly before menopause begins, we still should be doing things to support our health. So why would giving an estrogen patch that is supposed to hypothetically just kind of keep us back to maybe the hormone levels that we had in our teens, why would that be enough then when it even wasn't enough in our teens, right? And so even if it was putting your rate back there, it's still not enough. And realistically, there's a lot of other things going on that at that time in our lives that we have to be especially mindful of. Aging, it is a full body attack. It is what we consider aging is the number one risk factor for chronic disease. So it's something we can't get away from. So estrogen is and estradiol is one piece of this puzzle. We really need to attack it from all angles.
Yeah, it's just like when people seek out supplements, it's a little bit of a different subject, but they're looking for that one thing. And I've talked about this before. Anytime I go on, say, an IG reel or something like that and talk about a supplement, my DMs will light up because, or if I talk about bioidentical hormones, the same thing. And I have a hard time getting women to say, no, this is not a magic fix. This is just part of the many things I do. So looking at supplements, do you recommend supplements that support fasting mimicking?
So there are no supplements that can give you the same benefits of fasting and fasting mimicking. I think that's the most important thing to call out. Now, am I anti supplements? No, certainly not. I think that there is a place in a world for supplements. I think it's really important to work with the healthcare practitioner that understands you and what you need to personalize the supplements to your unique needs. I don't think everybody should be doing the exact same thing. They're meant to literally supplement what you are doing with your
Right.
nutrition, right? So we just need to figure out for you, where are there gaps? And where should we try and add a supplement to fill in those gaps? Where are there little holes in your water jug, and where are we going to put these little pins to save it, right? And so one is certainly personalization. Two is supplements will never replace the need for fasting and fasting mimicking, even if, and I don't know how much your audience knows about fasting and some of the benefits, but for those of you out there that are really, really keen and eager, you may know that when we fast, what we can do is suppress something called mTOR. And that's also why a lot of people will take something called rapamycin. And so rapamycin can suppress mTOR, but one thing is that we have seen that there are some downsides to taking rapamycin. The research is still out on long-term downsides of taking some of those supplements. Whereas if you just fast, which is something that our ancestors did from the very early days, we know that as long as you're not doing it every single day for very, very long periods of time, there's no really serious side effects, right? So you're avoiding some of the downside side effects that you might see with a supplement, or in this case, honestly, really more of a medication that's trying to kind of hack the system. Not to mention that mTOR suppression is one piece of the fasting and fasting mimicking puzzle. Our body is so intelligent and there are so many pathways. I can name three, pathways beyond mTOR that we are working on, right? Beyond mTOR that we know of right now. And there's way, way more than that. Like it's really just so, so complex. So to think that we are smarter than our bodies, I think is misguided. Our bodies have had way more time to figure out what works for us evolutionarily wise, and sometimes we just need to trust it to do its own work.
Love that. I sometimes get tired of the word biohack that's out there everywhere for that very reason that you just said, because it's almost like we're saying we are smarter than our own bodies and we're going to hack this thing and find the magic bullet, so to speak. So I love that you hit on that. As we start to wrap up, a couple of questions. Was there anything we didn't cover? And then earlier on, you had mentioned a study around type 2 diabetes, and I believe more behavior related.
Yeah. Man, well there's so much that we could touch on that we haven't covered. I would say we'll share my contact information at the end, and if you guys are curious about how fasting mimicking might support you and your unique needs, go online. There's a lot of research. There's over 40 clinical trials. So this research is being done now by over 30 different top research institutions. We're talking the Yales, the Stanfords, the Mayo Clinics of the world. There is getting more and more and more information out there around this, and it is the top quality information that you can find. So go explore and ask questions, and you can certainly reach out to me for more. Now, in terms of that one study that you mentioned, it's one of my favorites, so I'm glad that we get to touch on it. What we were able to see with fasting mimicking diets compared to a healthy diet for people with type 2 diabetes. So they're still being, the control group was still getting a healthy diet for people with type 2 diabetes. Both groups saw weight loss, but of course, the fasting mimicking diet saw better weight loss. Both groups saw some improvement in medication usage and blood sugar management and all of those things that we were expecting to see. But the fasting mimicking group saw better. So, sure, okay. So, in terms of what the things that we expected to see, the fasting mimicking diet was significantly better on every single metric that we wanted to see. But on top of that, even though the researchers didn't ask the patients to support added exercise, when they looked at how much exercise the groups were doing and compared them at the end of the study, the fasting mimicking diet group increased their physical activity by 4 hours a week, whereas the generally healthy nutrition every single day group decreased their physical activity by 6 hours a week. And so then the researchers were like, what the heck? I mean, that's a really big difference. That's a 10-hour difference of weekly exercise. And so why would this happen? And their assumption, right, because we can only kind of assume at this point, is one, the fasting mimicking diet group only had to make changes 5 days a month as opposed to every single day. And so they didn't have to do as much, and they had 25 remaining days in the month to think about other things that they might want to do. When you do a fasting mimicking diet, it's still not, I wouldn't say it's like super, super easy. I would say it's still a challenge. You're still, making an intervention to support your health. So you feel accomplished when you're done. So now you're like, man, I did that. I just crushed through these 5 days. And now you think, what else can I do? Because now I got 25 more days. And then last but not least, the fasting mimicking group showed muscle protection, which the regular diet group did not. They lost weight, but they also lost muscle. And so that regular diet group probably felt weaker. And so they were like, I don't know. I don't really want to go to the gym, or I don't want to go for a walk. Whereas the fasting mimicking diet group felt lighter and stronger. So all of those things like really would motivate me certainly to go make an additional effort somewhere else beyond even just nutrition alone. So I love that study. And I think it really just goes to show the vastness of ways that fasting and fasting mimicking can support health, even beyond just some of the obvious.
I love that we looped back to this because this is really interesting findings and exciting findings. I'm a health coach, so hearing things like this it gives me hope, because sometimes if somebody's on, say, a traditional diet, they are weak. They're losing muscle and they're maybe low on calories, and it's not, sorry, losing my headset. It was like slipping down the back, and I'm like, oh no, we don't need that. Yeah. So I think, the lower energy, and then it can get to be where there's no wins. If somebody's just perpetually dieting or lowering their calories or going on really long fasts, and let's say they don't make that really long fast, and then they feel like they failed. Well, the 5 days, like you said, that's a win. It's a huge win. Like, okay, I did this thing. It's doable.
Not to mention that now, as a registered dietitian, I'm not going to advocate that you eat whatever the heck you want in the 25 days in between doing your rounds. And for patients with type 2 diabetes, we generally will see them do 6 months in a row. For generally healthy people, we'll do 3 months in a row. And then we transition to maintenance where we only do it every 3 to 4 months. That's generally the protocol. In like these earlier phases, we might do them monthly, right? So that's why I say 25 days in between instead of 3 months or 4 months in between. But in that in between time, all of the research shows that you could get those results that they show without making any other changes to your nutrition. Now, certainly, as I just mentioned, you kind of feel very motivated to make other lifestyle changes, which might also certainly include making other healthy nutrition changes to your life. But it is kind of nice to know that you don't have to be perfect every single day with this solution, because it gives you a little bit more flexibility to kind of enjoy, and sure, maybe go on vacation and indulge a little bit, and be a real person and make mistakes. That's okay. So I love that as kind of just something that you can remind yourself of as you choose to move forward with this.
Mhm. I'm really glad you clarified that because, yes, that other 25 days is really important not to just go off the rails. It's like when we do a reverse diet, sometimes I'll have people reverse diet. I'm like, no, that doesn't mean you eat everything you see in sight. So I'm glad that you hit on that. And then also it's about overall consistency and not perfection. So really, really important points. Renee, this has been a lively discussion, the type of discussion I love to have with so much information and ideas going back and forth. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Where can people find you?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed being here so much. The lively discussion is entirely you, and I just get to ride your coattails. So thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everybody who listened to us today. If you are interested in learning more, please don't hesitate. You can reach me directly on Instagram at Fitton Nutrition. That's Fitton, my last name, Nutrition, or online at fittonnutrition.com. And if you are interested in a fasting mimicking, I would certainly urge you to check out one of those two companies that I shared earlier. So Prolon is generally what I would recommend for my generally healthy agers, or I should say generally healthy individuals that are looking to age healthfully, looking to optimize, looking to prevent. And then if you do have a metabolic health concern, if you have type 2 diabetes, if you have prediabetes, then I'd recommend going to check out L Nutra Health. So for Prolon, go to Prolon Life, Prolon life.com. And for L Nutra Health, it's L-NU.
Perfect. I'll make sure all of this is in the show notes. And thank you again, Renee. Appreciate you so much. And to our listeners, wherever you are in the world, we wish you every blessing. Bye for now.